I remember the day of the grand opening as if it were burned into my skin. The town gathered in front of the old brick building, banners fluttering in the wind, cameras flashing, veterans in faded jackets standing proud. I had imagined this moment for years. I had pictured myself standing at the podium, my heart steady, finally seeing a dream come alive. A place where men and women like me could find a second home. But when the velvet cloth was pulled away from the bronze plaque, my name was nowhere to be found. It was as if I had never existed. I stood in the crowd with my hands trembling at my sides, and then I heard the voice of the keynote speaker. It was my sister. The same sister who once promised me we would build this center together. The sister who swore she would never let me be forgotten. Her smile was practiced. Her words rolled out smooth and polished. She spoke of sacrifice, of community, of the years she had poured into making this place a reality. And I, the woman who had carried this vision through sleepless nights and broken bones, was reduced to a silent shadow in the back row. Betrayal does not always come like a storm. Sometimes it arrives quietly in broad daylight when the people you trust most step forward and erase your name. That moment cut deeper than shrapnel ever did. I had survived deployments, surgeries, long months of pain and healing. Yet standing there, erased from my own story, I felt a different kind of wound. One that went straight through the heart. Before I take you deeper into this journey, before we walk together through the silence, the rage, and the fight to reclaim my voice, I want to ask you to pause for just a second. Hit the like button. Subscribe to this channel. Stay with us here, where we share the kind of stories that might break your heart, but also remind you that hope can still rise from the ruins. Because what happened next is not only about me. It is about every veteran who has ever come home to find themselves unseen. It is about every daughter who has been told her scars make her weak. It is about the quiet strength we carry when we are told to stand down, yet choose to stand tall. That day at the opening of the community center, my sister lifted the plaque like it was her crown, and I realized the battle I had to fight was no longer on foreign soil. It was here, in the very place I thought would save me. The fight was not for medals or recognition. It was for truth, and for the right to belong to my own story. Stay with me. What I am about to tell you is not just a tale of betrayal. It is a testimony of endurance, of how a soldier stripped of her name learned to rise again. This is where the real story begins. When I first left the Navy after 18 years of service, I did not feel triumphant. People like to imagine that stepping off the base for the last time is filled with relief, joy, maybe even a sense of celebration. For me, it was something else entirely. It felt like I had stepped into a silence so wide and heavy that even my boots could not break it. I carried medals in a box, scars beneath my skin, and a medical file that told a story I never wanted to read out loud. My spine carried the weight of years at sea, deployments across the world, and the kind of injuries that never truly vanish. I came home to Virginia with more than physical pain. I carried the echo of voices lost in war, faces of women and men who never made it back. Each night I woke up to the sound of helicopters only I could hear. Each morning I tried to remind myself that I was more than my uniform, more than the rank stitched across my chest. But stripped of that identity, I was left with a question that haunted me. Who am I now? In the months of therapy that followed, I realized that healing was not only about my body. It was about finding a new mission. Soldiers are trained to fight with purpose. Without that purpose, life becomes a battlefield of its own, and so the dream began to take shape. I wanted to create a place where veterans like me could walk in and not feel broken. A place that did not ask us to explain the unexplainable. A home where the silence after service could be shared and not carried alone. It was during those long nights of scribbling ideas into a notebook that my sister Linda entered the picture. Linda had always been the more practical one. She stayed in town, built a career in local business, and learned how to navigate small-town politics with the ease of someone who knew which hands to shake. We were so different. I was the one who chased the horizon. She was the one who stayed rooted in the soil of our hometown. Yet when I told her my dream, something in her eyes flickered. She said she believed in it. She said she believed in me. Together, we began sketching out plans for what would become the community center. We talked about rooms filled with light, walls lined with photographs of those who had served, counseling offices where no one would feel judged, a kitchen where coffee was always brewing. Linda leaned in close, her hand resting on mine, and said we would build this place as a gift to those who gave so much. I wanted to believe her words because they carried the warmth I had longed for. The building we chose was one that everyone in town recognized. It was the old town library, abandoned for nearly a decade, its bricks crumbling but still strong. I remember the first time we walked through its empty halls. Dust floated in the light coming through broken windows, and the floor creaked with every step. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine laughter filling the space, veterans sitting shoulder to shoulder, a piano playing softly in the corner. In that moment, I felt hope stir inside me for the first time since I had taken off the uniform. We reached out to people we knew, friends of our parents, local business owners, even churches and civic groups. Slowly, donations began to come in. Sometimes it was a check, sometimes it was boxes of supplies, sometimes it was just a promise to volunteer. Every gesture mattered. I threw myself into the effort with the same determination I had once carried into deployment. I made calls, I wrote letters, I attended every community meeting. My body was still healing, but my spirit finally felt alive again. Linda, with her natural charm, became the face of our mission. She was good at speaking in front of crowds, shaking hands, convincing donors. I did not mind. I thought we were a team, each of us playing our role. She could smile for the cameras, while I drafted grant proposals late into the night. She could host luncheons while I met with veterans one-on-one, listening to their stories, gathering their needs. I never once imagined that my role could be erased. I thought love and loyalty were stronger than ambition. Looking back, I wonder if any of you have ever shared a dream with someone you love, only to later question if they loved the dream as much as you did. Maybe you have felt the sting of investing everything into a bond that seemed unshakable, only to watch cracks appear where you least expected them. If you have, I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me if you have ever trusted someone with your vision, only to find out that trust was fragile. The work was exhausting but beautiful. I remember the nights we stayed at the library past midnight, spreading blueprints across the floor, eating pizza out of greasy boxes, while we argued about paint colors and room layouts. There was laughter then. Linda joked that I was too sentimental, that no one cared what shade of blue the counseling office walls would be. I argued that color mattered, that every detail spoke to whether someone felt safe. We laughed until tears rolled down our cheeks. Those are the memories that hurt the most now, because they remind me of what I thought we were building together. Months passed, and the dream grew. We secured a grant from a national foundation that supported veterans. I remember clutching the acceptance letter like it was a lifeline. Without those funds, the project would have crumbled. Linda hugged me tight and whispered that she was proud of me. That moment still replays in my mind because I wonder if her pride was real or if it was the first shadow of a plan I could not see. I threw myself into the renovations, even when my back screamed with pain, even when the doctors told me to slow down. For every hour I pushed through, I imagined the day a young veteran would walk into that center and feel, for the first time in years, that they belonged somewhere. That vision was worth every ache. I carried lumber. I painted walls. I wrote speeches I thought I might someday give. Linda began to appear less often at the site. She said work kept her busy. She said she was handling donors and public relations. I accepted her explanation, though sometimes I felt the weight of carrying so much alone. Still, I reminded myself that we were sisters, that loyalty was stronger than distance. If you are listening to this and nodding, because you too once convinced yourself that excuses were harmless, that loyalty meant ignoring red flags, I invite you to share your story. Sometimes telling the truth of what we endured helps others recognize their own patterns. Have you ever given someone the benefit of the doubt until the doubt consumed you? What I did not know then was that seeds of betrayal often sprout in silence. They grow quietly, like ivy across the walls of a house, until one day you wake up and realize the bricks are covered, the foundation hidden. I did not see it happening because I did not want to. I wanted to believe that the bond of sisters, the bond of shared vision, was enough. At night, when the work was done, I sat alone in my small apartment and sketched out programs I wanted to offer at the center. Writing workshops, therapy groups, job training classes. I thought about how many lives could change if we built not just a building, but a sanctuary. In those quiet hours, I felt like I was finally piecing myself back together. And yet, beneath the hope, there was an unease I could not name. Sometimes I would catch Linda looking at me with an expression I could not read. Sometimes her praise felt rehearsed, like lines spoken from a stage. I brushed those doubts aside, telling myself it was only fatigue, only stress. After all, we were in this together, or at least I thought we were. As the months turned into a year, the center began to rise out of dust and scaffolding. Fresh paint covered old bricks, sunlight poured through new windows, and the scent of cut wood lingered in the air. Each day I walked through the halls of the former library and felt like I was breathing life into something forgotten. The building no longer seemed abandoned. It seemed to carry the heartbeat of every veteran who had dreamed of a place like this. I spent hours sanding down floors until my hands blistered. I climbed ladders despite the protests of my injured back. Every ache felt like a tribute to those who never came home. I told myself this center would stand as a monument not made of stone, but of community. A living monument where stories would be told, where silence would be broken, where healing would not be measured by medals, but by laughter echoing against the walls. Linda drifted in and out of the process. She would sweep into the building with her polished smile and clipboard, shaking hands with donors, nodding to the contractors, then disappear again for days. She always seemed busy, important, unreachable. I reminded myself that her strengths were different than mine. She handled the politics, I handled the labor. That was our balance. That was our unspoken agreement. Sometimes late at night, after the crews had gone home, I stood in the main hall and let myself dream. I imagined veterans sitting in a circle, shoulders relaxed, voices cracking as they shared memories they had carried alone for years. I imagined the library shelves filled not with dusty books, but with art supplies, journals, and photographs. I imagined myself standing among them, not as a hero, not as a soldier, but simply as one of them. Equal, seen, heard. I began writing down names of those I hoped to invite to the opening ceremony. Men and women I had served with, families who had lost loved ones, local leaders who had pledged their support. My heart swelled with anticipation. I believed that on that day, every sacrifice would feel worth it. But there were moments that gnawed at me. I would overhear Linda talking to donors, using words like my vision or my leadership. The first time I heard it, I laughed it off, thinking she simply misspoke. The second time, I felt a pang of unease. By the fifth or sixth time, I began to wonder if she was rewriting the story of who we were and what we had built. If you have ever had someone take credit for your work, you know that sting. It is not just about pride. It is about identity. It is about watching a part of yourself being stolen in plain sight. Have you ever lived that moment? If you have, I invite you to share it in the comments. Your story matters, and telling it might remind someone else that they are not alone in that pain. Still, I pressed on. I told myself the center was bigger than ego, bigger than credit. What mattered most was that veterans would have a place to belong. If my name faded into the background, so be it. I thought my sister's ambition was harmless. I thought love would protect me. There were quiet moments between us that still held tenderness. Like the night we sat on the library steps after painting the main hall. Linda leaned against my shoulder and whispered that she envied me. She said I had seen the world, that I had lived with purpose, that people respected me in a way they never would respect her. I told her she was wrong. I told her she was the anchor, the one who kept our family grounded. She smiled then, but it did not reach her eyes. Looking back, I wonder if that was the night resentment truly bloomed. As construction neared completion, invitations for the grand opening were sent out. Linda handled the press releases. She spoke at local radio stations. She gave interviews where she described the center as her lifelong dream. Each time, I swallowed my discomfort, telling myself the truth would eventually shine. The veterans knew. The town knew. Or at least I thought they did. One afternoon, as I sorted through files in my apartment, I stumbled upon a draft of the grant application I had written months earlier. My handwriting filled the margins, notes about budget, schedules, and vision. On the cover page in bold type was Linda's name. My name was nowhere to be found. My stomach dropped. Somehow, somewhere, she had submitted the application as if she alone had written it. That night, I confronted her. She laughed, brushing it off as a clerical error. She said my name had been on the final version. She promised she would fix any confusion. Her words were smooth, but her eyes darted away from mine. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her, because the alternative was too painful. To those of you listening, have you ever silenced your own instincts because you loved someone too much to face the truth? Have you ever chosen denial because it was easier than heartbreak? If you have, leave a comment. Let me know how you found the courage to face what you already knew deep down. Despite the unease, the center was nearly ready. Furniture was delivered. The walls gleamed with fresh paint. A plaque was ordered to commemorate the opening. I imagined running my fingers over the letters of my name, not out of vanity, but out of relief that my journey had been acknowledged, that I had not disappeared. I remember the last night before the ceremony. I walked through every room with the lights off, letting the moonlight guide me. In the counseling office, I touched the smooth desk and whispered a prayer for the people who would sit there. In the art room, I trailed my hand over jars of paint and stacks of paper, imagining the colors that would soon cover the walls. In the main hall, I stood still, breathing in the silence, and promised myself that whatever came next, I had already done something worthwhile. What I did not know then was how fragile dreams can be when ambition sharpens into betrayal. I had built a sanctuary with my own hands, but I had also built it on trust. And trust, once broken, is harder to rebuild than any wall or roof. When dawn came, I rose early, polished my uniform even though I no longer wore the rank, and prepared myself for what I believed would be the proudest day of my life. The sun rose over the town square, casting golden light on the building that had once been nothing more than a shell. Now it stood tall, a beacon of hope. I walked toward it with my heart full, never once imagining that my name would vanish from the plaque, or that my sister would stand at the podium in my place. If you are still here listening, I want to ask you something before we step into that moment. Have you ever poured yourself into a dream only to watch it slip through your fingers at the very last second? Have you ever felt erased? Share your thoughts in the comments. You might discover that others have walked the same path, and that connection might give you strength. As I stood outside the building that morning, watching the crowd gather, watching veterans in wheelchairs and families with flags in their hands, I felt both pride and peace. I believed I had finally come home. What I did not know was that home was about to vanish, and with it, the trust I had carried in my sister. 6 months away can feel like a lifetime when your heart is tethered to a dream. My body needed that time. Therapy in another state had pushed me through grueling exercises, retraining muscles that no longer obeyed, teaching me how to manage the relentless ache that came from years of service. I had focused on healing, but every night before I closed my eyes, I thought about the center. I imagined the final touches being added, the paint drying, the rooms filling with light. I believed I was stepping back into a home I had built with my own hands. On the morning of my return, I woke before dawn. My uniform no longer bore a rank, but I pressed it anyway, smoothing every crease as if preparing for inspection. Old habits die hard. The drive into town was quiet. The streets I had once known by heart seemed smaller somehow, the houses leaning with age, the storefronts carrying the weight of time. But at the end of Main Street, standing proud against the rising sun, was the building that had consumed my every thought. The community center, my sanctuary. People were already gathering in the square, their voices carrying on the wind. Veterans in faded caps rolled up in wheelchairs. Children waved flags. Local reporters held their microphones ready. I parked my car on the side street, my chest tight with anticipation. This was it. The culmination of sweat, pain, and faith. The moment we had all been waiting for. I slipped into the crowd quietly, letting the hum of excitement wash over me. Faces turned toward the podium set up in front of the building. A velvet cloth draped over the plaque by the entrance, hiding the words I had longed to see. My name. My proof that I had not disappeared after the Navy, that I was still someone worth remembering. The mayor stepped up first, offering words about community and resilience. I half listened, my eyes fixed on that cloth. My palms grew damp, my throat ached with hope. And then, at last, Linda walked up to the microphone. Her smile was dazzling, practiced, almost regal. She wore a crisp suit, her hair swept into a perfect bun. She looked every bit the leader, the visionary, the kind of woman who belonged on a stage. My heart swelled with pride, even through my nerves. This was my sister. This was the woman who had promised to stand by me. The mayor pulled at the velvet cloth. It slid away to reveal the bronze plaque. For a heartbeat, I could not breathe. The letters glimmered in the sunlight, sharp and final. Community Center of Linda West for Veterans. No mention of me, not a single letter. It was as if I had never existed, as if my hands had never lifted a single board, as if my vision had never fueled a single late night. The crowd erupted in applause. Linda raised her chin, basking in the attention. She began to speak. Her voice was steady, smooth, rehearsed. She told the crowd how she had dreamed of this place for years, how she had fought for funding, how she had poured her soul into making this center a reality. Each word was a blade. I stood frozen in the back row, unable to move, unable to shout. My body felt heavy, my legs like stone. People around me cheered, nodding, clapping. I wanted to scream that it was a lie, that I was part of this, that my name should be shining on that plaque, but my voice caught in my throat. There is a silence that comes when betrayal is too sharp to name. It presses on your chest. It burns in your eyes. It traps your words inside. That was the silence that wrapped itself around me in that moment. I was no longer the soldier who had commanded teams, who had made decisions in life or death. I was a ghost in the crowd, erased in front of my own community. Linda's speech went on. She spoke of sacrifice and resilience. She spoke of honoring those who had served. She even spoke of family, of the values instilled in us as children. The hypocrisy of her words struck me like thunder. She was rewriting the story, reshaping the truth, and no one in that crowd questioned her. If you have ever stood in a room where your truth was denied, where someone else claimed what you bled for, you know that ache. It is not only anger, it is grief. Have you lived through that moment? If so, I would like to hear your story in the comments. Sometimes sharing these wounds helps us remember we are not alone. As the applause rose again, I felt my eyes burn with tears I refused to let fall. Soldiers do not cry in public. That was the voice drilled into me for years. But in that moment, I was not a soldier. I was a woman stripped of recognition, stripped of belonging. I turned slightly, watching the faces in the crowd. Did they know? Did anyone remember that I had been there from the start? Some veterans glanced at me, their expressions unreadable. A few nodded quietly, as if acknowledging the truth. But none spoke up. None interrupted. Fear or politeness held their tongues, and so the lie stood unchallenged. My sister's voice rang out one final time, thanking the town for their support, promising that this center would serve as a beacon of hope for generations. The ribbon was cut, cameras flashed, and the doors swung open. People surged forward, eager to see the inside. I remained rooted in place, my heart splintered. I wanted to walk away. I wanted to disappear before anyone noticed my pain. But my feet betrayed me, pulling me closer to the doors, closer to the dream that had once been mine. Inside, the rooms gleamed with fresh paint, furniture perfectly placed. Volunteers handed out refreshments. Laughter filled the air. Every corner I walked through reminded me of the nights I had worked until my back gave out, the mornings I rose before dawn to meet contractors, the letters I had written begging for grants. And yet, every plaque, every brochure, every speech gave the credit to Linda. Her name was everywhere. Mine was nowhere. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the silence felt heavier than ever. The dream I had clung to had become a nightmare I could not wake from. I wondered if I was foolish to ever believe that loyalty could withstand ambition. And here I want to ask you, the ones listening, have you ever found yourself erased from your own story? Have you ever been pushed aside by someone you loved, only to see them stand where you should have stood? If you feel called to share, write it in the comments. You never know who else might be comforted by your truth. The shock of that day did not end with the plaque. It was only the beginning of a revelation that would test every part of me. Because betrayal, once revealed, has a way of spreading, uncovering layers you never imagined. That day was the first crack. What followed would be an earthquake. The celebration stretched long into the afternoon. I lingered in the corners, watching people drift from room to room. They admired the polished wood floors, the photographs of veterans on the walls, the flags hung with care. They marveled at the transformation of the old library. Smiles, laughter, gratitude filled the air. To anyone else, it was a triumph. To me, it was a haunting. Every board and nail screamed my name, yet my name was gone. I slipped into the counseling office and closed the door behind me. The noise of the crowd faded into a muffled hum. For a moment, I pressed my palms against the cool desk and let the tears come. Quiet, controlled, but unstoppable. My body shook with the weight of what I had lost. It was not the building. It was not even the credit. It was the trust I had placed in my sister, the belief that blood meant loyalty. That was what shattered inside me that day. The door creaked open. Linda stood there, her expression unreadable. She stepped inside and shut the door with a soft click. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. The silence stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Finally, I found my voice. I asked her why my name was missing, why she stood on that stage as if I had never existed. Her answer was smooth, practiced, like a line she had rehearsed. She said donors would not take me seriously, not with my medical discharge, not with my history of injury. She said attaching my name would risk credibility. She said she had done it for both of us. The words cut deeper than the omission itself. She had not only erased me, she had framed me as a liability. My years of service, my scars, my survival had been turned into shame. I stood frozen, listening to her voice as it twisted justification into kindness. She smiled, even reached for my hand, as if expecting gratitude. I pulled back, my chest tight with disbelief. The sister who once whispered pride into my ear now told me I was unworthy of standing beside her. I wish I could tell you I shouted, that I demanded justice in that moment. But I did not. My voice faltered. My body sagged. Betrayal has a way of stealing your strength when you need it most. I walked out of that room in silence, my boots heavy against the polished floor. That night, the town paper ran an article praising Linda West, visionary leader of the new community center. Her photo filled the front page, her words printed in bold. I read it alone in my apartment, each line a knife. No mention of me, not even a shadow. I called an old friend from the Navy, someone who had been with me through deployments, someone who knew my heart. I told her what had happened. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before she finally said she was not surprised. Ambition does strange things to people, she told me. Even family. Her words stung because they carried truth. I wanted to believe my sister had simply made a mistake, that somehow this could be fixed. But deep down I knew. This was no accident. This was a choice. If you are listening, have you ever realized too late that someone's betrayal was not a slip, but a decision? Have you ever felt that cold clarity settle into your bones? If you have, share it in the comments. Sometimes telling the truth of that realization helps others find their own clarity. In the days that followed, I avoided the center. I could not bear to walk through those doors and see my absence carved into every wall. I threw myself into therapy sessions, into long walks by the river, into anything that would quiet the storm inside me. But the storm refused to fade. People stopped me in town, congratulating me for my sister's achievement. They smiled, unaware of the truth, asking if I had attended the ceremony, if I had seen the wonderful work Linda had done. Each time I forced a smile, nodded, and said little. My silence felt like complicity, yet speaking up felt impossible. Who would believe me? One afternoon, I ran into an older veteran, a man who had once handed me a donation check with trembling hands. He looked me in the eyes and whispered that he knew the truth. He had seen me there every night, painting, carrying, writing. He told me not to give up, that someday others would see it too. His words warmed me, but they also cut deep, because kindness from strangers reminded me of the cruelty of my own blood. I began keeping a journal, something I had never done in the Navy. I wrote down every memory, every detail of the center's creation. The nights with blueprints, the letters sent, the meetings attended. I needed proof, even if only for myself, that I had been there, that I mattered. Writing became my anchor. One evening, I sat at my desk, flipping through photographs I had taken during construction. There I was, covered in paint, hammer in hand, standing beside bare beams. There I was, smiling through exhaustion, arms wrapped around boxes of supplies. Evidence was everywhere, yet in the eyes of the town, I was invisible. Have you ever felt the need to collect proof of your own life, as if the world might forget you existed? If you have, leave a comment. Your story might echo louder than you think, and someone else might feel less alone because of it. The more I looked at those photos, the more a fire began to kindle inside me. I had been silent long enough. My sister's version of the story might have filled the air for now, but truth has a way of pushing through cracks, and I decided then that I would not let her rewrite me out of existence. I started small. I reached out to veterans who had volunteered alongside me. I asked them to remember. Some hesitated, afraid of losing support, afraid of crossing Linda. But a few nodded firmly, promising they would speak if the time came. Their loyalty meant more than words can capture. The confrontation with Linda weighed heavy on my mind. I replayed it again and again, her smile, her excuses, her dismissal. Each time the pain sharpened into resolve. I realized that love without respect is only illusion. Blood without honor is only DNA. The shock of that day lingered like smoke after a fire. It clouded everything, even my memories of laughter and hope. But in the ashes of betrayal, something else stirred. A determination, quiet but fierce. I had lost my name on a plaque, but I had not lost my voice. And someday I would use it. Before we move forward in this story, I want to ask you, the listener, one last question for now. If you were in my place, standing in front of a crowd as your name vanished from your own dream, what would you have done? Would you have shouted? Would you have walked away? Or would you have carried the silence like I did? Share your thoughts below. Your voice matters here because this story is not just mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever been erased and fought to be seen again. That day marked the first shock, but it was only the beginning. Betrayal has layers, and each one is heavier than the last. My sister had taken my name, but what she would try to take next would cut even deeper. The battle ahead was not about a building. It was about dignity, identity, and justice. And I was not going to surrender. I could not sleep the night after the ceremony. My apartment was dark, but my mind lit up like a battlefield. Every sound outside seemed sharp, every creak in the floor echoed. I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over again. The cloth falling from the plaque, the letters gleaming. My sister's name shining where mine should have been, her voice ringing with practiced conviction. By dawn, exhaustion pressed heavy on me, but I knew I could not hide. I needed answers. Not from the town, not from the veterans, not from strangers, from Linda. The woman who had stood by me in childhood, who had once held my hand when storms rattled our old house, who promised we were building the center together. I found her the next afternoon in her office at the community center. Sunlight poured across her desk, glinting off the plaque she had proudly displayed from the local Chamber of Commerce. Her name was etched on it in bold, Linda West, Visionary of the Year. My stomach twisted. She looked up when I walked in, her face calm, her smile controlled. No flicker of guilt, no tremor of nerves, just polished composure. She gestured for me to sit. I did not. My body was too tense, too rigid. I asked her why. My voice cracked despite my effort to steady it. Why was I erased? Why did she stand there and claim what was ours as if it had always been hers alone? Her reply was slow, deliberate, almost kind. She told me I should have expected it. She said the donors respected her name more. She said the town saw her as reliable, while my medical file made people uneasy. She said attaching me would weaken credibility, and that I should understand. Her words pierced deeper than any weapon ever could. To hear my own sister dismiss me as a liability, to hear her cast my years of service and my scars as shame instead of honor, was almost unbearable. I stood there trembling, anger burning beneath my ribs, but she kept speaking. She told me I had been through enough, that I needed rest, that she was protecting me by taking on the public face of the dream. As if betrayal could be framed as mercy. As if erasure could be disguised as love. There are moments in life when silence is forced upon you, not by chains or threats, but by the sheer weight of disbelief. That moment was one of them. I could not find words strong enough to match the fire inside me. My throat closed, my body stiffened, my heart screamed. But no sound came out. I turned to leave, but before I reached the door, she spoke again. She told me she would handle everything from now on. She said I should trust her. She said I would thank her someday. I closed the door behind me without answering. My hands shook so badly I could hardly grip the handle. If you have ever been told you were a burden by someone who should have cherished you, you know how that poison spreads. It seeps into every corner of your mind, making you doubt your worth, making you question whether you deserve to be erased. Have you ever heard words like that from someone you trusted? If you feel safe, share it in the comments. You never know how much your honesty could mean to someone walking through the same storm. I walked out into the evening light, the sky painted in hues of pink and gold, yet I felt nothing but gray. The air smelled of fresh paint and new beginnings, but inside me was only rot. I wanted to scream at the town, to demand they see the truth, but I knew if I shouted now, it would sound like bitterness, not justice. Linda had crafted her image too well. She had rehearsed her story too perfectly. That night I went back to my apartment and pulled out the notebook where I had written plans for the center. My handwriting filled page after page. I traced the lines with my fingers, feeling the weight of every hour I had poured into those words. I wondered if they meant anything now, if history would remember the truth, or only the polished lie Linda presented to the world. As the days passed, I tried to carry on. I attended therapy, I volunteered quietly with veterans who needed support. I tried to anchor myself in purpose. But everywhere I turned, I saw her name. On brochures, on banners, on the lips of townspeople who praised her tireless dedication. And each time, I felt my chest tighten. One afternoon, I walked past the center and saw her standing outside with a group of donors. She laughed, her voice ringing clear. She gestured toward the building with pride. I saw the way they looked at her, admiration shining in their eyes, and I realized with cold clarity that she had not stolen my role by accident. She had taken it because she wanted it, because she believed she deserved it more. That realization hit harder than the plaque. Betrayal was not a mistake. It was a choice. If you are still listening, I want to pause here and ask you, have you ever faced that moment when you realized someone's actions were not careless slips but deliberate decisions? How did you handle it? Did it break you? Or did it ignite something stronger? Write your reflections in the comments. Your voice matters, and it might just help someone else find courage. I carried that fire with me as I walked away from the center. My legs were heavy, my heart raw, but beneath the pain was a quiet determination. I had been dismissed as weak, erased as irrelevant, labeled as a burden. But I knew my truth, and one day the world would know it too. That night I wrote in my journal again, not just memories but promises. Promises that I would not let silence define me. Promises that I would gather the proof, collect the voices, and make sure the story was told. Not for revenge, not for pride, but for dignity. Because every veteran deserved to know that scars are not liabilities. They are proof of survival. And in the flicker of that promise, I felt something stir inside me. Not rage, not despair, but strength. Quiet, steady, unshakable. The kind of strength no one can erase. In the weeks after that conversation with Linda, I moved through life like a shadow. My body walked the streets of town, my lips formed polite greetings, but my spirit lingered somewhere else. I had faced battles overseas, but this was different. This was war waged in whispers and smiles, where the enemy wore the face of my sister. I told myself to stay quiet, to let the storm pass. But silence is its own kind of weight. It presses down, it hollows you out. Each time I saw her name printed in the paper, each time I heard someone praise her vision, I felt that weight grow heavier. I felt myself disappearing. At night, I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by stacks of papers, blueprints, emails, letters, photographs, evidence of the work I had done. I spread them out like pieces of a puzzle, as if arranging them on the table might remind me I was real, that I had not imagined my part in building the center, that I mattered. One evening, I stared at a photo of myself covered in paint, smiling despite exhaustion. My hands trembled as I traced the edges. I whispered aloud, "You were there. You mattered." Sometimes you have to say the truth out loud just to keep it alive inside you. If you are listening now, have you ever needed to remind yourself of your own worth because someone else tried to erase it? Have you ever spoken words into the empty air just to convince yourself they were true? If you have, share it in the comments. Your truth may give strength to someone still searching for theirs. Slowly, I began to see that silence would not protect me. It would only protect the lie. Linda's version of the story grew louder with each passing day, and if I did not begin to gather my courage, the truth would be buried forever. So I started small. I spoke quietly to veterans who had volunteered alongside me. I asked them what they remembered. Many nodded, their eyes filled with sympathy. Some admitted they had known all along but were afraid to speak against Linda. A few promised that when the time came, they would stand with me. Their words were a balm, proof that I was not invisible. I wrote down their names, their memories, their promises. My journal became more than a collection of thoughts. It became a ledger of truth. Each page carried weight. Each entry was a thread weaving my story back together. Therapy sessions took on new meaning. My counselor asked me what I wanted from all this. Was it recognition? Was it revenge? I told her it was neither. What I wanted was dignity. I wanted to reclaim my place in my own story. That clarity gave me strength. One morning, I walked past the center and saw a group of young veterans gathered on the steps. They were laughing, sipping coffee, leaning on one another. For a moment, my heart softened. This was why I had dreamed this dream. Not for my name on a plaque, but for scenes like this, for connection, for healing. But the bitterness returned quickly. They did not know who had laid the first brick of that dream. They believed the story they had been told. Have you ever felt torn between pride in what you created and pain at being excluded from it? Have you ever watched others enjoy the fruit of your labor while your name was hidden from view? If you have, write about it in the comments. Someone listening may need to know they are not alone in that contradiction. As winter set in, the nights grew longer, and my resolve grew stronger. I stopped questioning whether I had the right to fight. I began asking how. I sorted my papers into folders, organized my photographs, cataloged my emails. Piece by piece, I built a case. Not for court yet, but for myself. Proof that I was not a ghost. One evening, Rachel, a young journalist from town, knocked on my door. She had heard whispers, seen the unease in certain veterans' eyes. She asked if I wanted to tell my side of the story. I hesitated. Fear clenched my chest. If I spoke, people might call me bitter, unstable, jealous. They might dismiss me just as Linda had. But if I stayed silent, the lie would stand. I told Rachel I was not ready yet. She nodded with understanding, but before she left, she said something that stuck with me. Silence protects the liar, not the truth. That sentence burned in my mind long after she walked away. It echoed through every sleepless night, every lonely morning. Silence protects the liar, not the truth. I realized then that my fight was not just for myself. It was for every veteran who had ever been told their scars made them weak, every daughter who had ever been silenced by a family that should have loved her, every survivor who had ever been erased. My story was only one among many, but it was mine, and it deserved to be heard. So I made a vow. I would not rush. I would not lash out in rage. I would prepare. Quietly, steadily, with the same discipline the Navy had drilled into me. Because battles are not always won by the loudest voices. Sometimes they are won by the ones who keep their ground, who gather their strength, who wait for the right moment to strike. If you have ever had to bide your time, to gather strength in silence before speaking your truth, share it in the comments. How did you know when the time was right? Your insight may be the light someone else is waiting for. I closed my journal that night with a steady hand. For the first time since the plaque was unveiled, I felt a sense of direction. The betrayal still burned, but the fire no longer consumed me. It fueled me. As I turned off the light, I whispered again into the dark. I was there. I mattered. And one day the world will know it. Winter wrapped the town in a hard stillness. The streets grew empty earlier each evening, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs. Yet the community center pulsed with warmth and light. Through frosted windows, I could see people gathering, laughter spilling into the night air, the sound of guitars strumming, the smell of coffee drifting across the square. From the outside, it looked like everything I had dreamed. But to me, it was a wound that refused to close. For weeks, I avoided stepping inside. Every brick felt like a betrayal, every banner with Linda's name like a bruise across my heart. Still, something in me knew I could not stay away forever. I needed to see it with my own eyes, to feel the truth instead of imagining it from the shadows. So one evening, I walked through the doors. The smell of fresh paint still lingered, mixed with the faint scent of floor polish. Veterans sat in groups, their laughter carrying above the hum of conversation. Some played cards. Others leaned against the walls, sipping from paper cups. For a moment I stood still, letting the noise wash over me, torn between pride and grief. A few faces turned toward me. Some smiled, cautious but kind. Others looked away quickly, as if acknowledging me might cost them something. I made my way slowly to the corner of the room, my boots echoing against the polished floor. An older man with silver hair and a limp approached. His jacket bore the patches of a Marine who had seen too much. He lowered his voice as he reached me. "We know," he whispered. "We know you built this place." The words nearly brought me to my knees. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. His eyes were clear, unwavering. He leaned closer and told me he still had the letter I had written months ago to the National Fund. The letter that secured the grant which made the center possible. "Without you," he said, "none of this would exist." My throat closed. For weeks I had felt erased, unseen. Now here was proof that I had not imagined it, that others had witnessed my part in the story. Gratitude flooded through me, but so did sorrow. Because even as he spoke the truth, his voice was hushed, his eyes darting around the room. He knew he could not say it louder. I asked him why. Why stay silent when he carried the evidence? His gaze dropped to the floor. "Because I need this place," he said. "Because for some of us, this center is the only home we have left. If we speak against Linda, she might shut us out, and we cannot risk losing what little we have." The words pierced me with a different kind of pain. I understood him. I could not fault him. Survival makes people cautious. Veterans know this better than anyone. We do what we must to endure, but it hurt all the same. The truth was known, but fear held it hostage. Have you ever carried the truth of something only to find that those around you were too afraid to stand beside it? Have you ever felt the ache of knowing others believe you, but cannot say so out loud? If you have, I invite you to share in the comments. Your voice might remind someone else that they are not as alone as they think. As the night went on, others approached me quietly. A woman who had volunteered during the renovation touched my arm and whispered that she remembered me hauling lumber long after everyone else had gone home. A younger veteran, still recovering from a tour overseas, told me he had seen me painting walls until my hands blistered. They all remembered. They all knew. But each of them spoke in whispers, glancing around as if Linda might be listening. Each of them carried the same fear. If they spoke publicly, they could lose access to the counseling services, the food pantry, the shelter the center provided. They could not risk it. I walked home that night with my chest heavy. The truth was alive, but buried under silence. It burned in me, begging to be freed, but I knew I could not demand that others sacrifice what they needed just to lift me up. Their survival came first. I would not ask them to risk it for me. Still, their quiet confessions were enough to keep me from drowning. Each whisper was a thread pulling me back from the edge of invisibility. I mattered. I was not erased in the hearts of those who had seen me. And maybe, one day their whispers would become louder. That night, I opened my journal and wrote down every word I had heard. I recorded the names, the moments, the details. I wrote about the Marine's letter, about the woman with the lumber, about the veteran with the paint. My journal became a chorus of voices, faint but undeniable. I asked myself over and over, how long can truth live in whispers? How long before silence smothers it completely? And now I want to ask you, have you ever lived in a situation where the truth was known but hidden, where people believed you but could not stand beside you openly? How did you carry that burden? Share it in the comments if you feel called to. Your story might give someone else the courage to endure their own silence. Days turned into weeks. I kept returning to the center, walking its halls, listening to the laughter, collecting the quiet words spoken in corners. Each time I left with more proof, more voices, more weight for the ledger of truth. It was not enough yet, but it was something. And slowly I began to feel the shape of a plan forming inside me. The following weeks blurred into a rhythm. Each time I stepped into the community center, I carried a strange mix of dread and longing. It was painful to walk through those doors, but it was also healing to be among people who understood what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, to struggle when the uniforms were folded away. The whispers did not stop. They multiplied. A man I barely knew leaned toward me as he passed in the hallway, murmuring that he had been there the night I drafted the grant proposal. A woman with trembling hands pulled me aside and reminded me she had written a small check only because I had asked, because she believed in me, not Linda. Even the janitor, a quiet figure who blended into the background, whispered that he had seen me working until midnight more times than he could count. Each voice was like a candle flickering in the dark. Alone, fragile. Together, they began to form a quiet glow. I carried those candles in my heart, gathering them, protecting them. I wrote every story in my journal, page after page, until the book itself felt heavy with truth. Still, all of it lived in the shadows. No one dared raise their voice in public. The fear was too strong, and I understood. The center provided food, shelter, counseling. For many, it was survival. To risk that was unthinkable. One evening after a support group meeting, I lingered outside in the cold air. Snow crunched beneath my boots as I stood beneath the dim glow of the streetlight. A veteran in his 70s approached, his breath visible in the night. He told me softly that he still had the letter I had written for the National Fund, folded neatly in his drawer at home. Without that letter, he said, there would be no center. His eyes glistened as he added, "We will not forget you. Even if the plaque never bears your name, we will not forget." I swallowed hard against the lump in my throat. Gratitude swelled inside me, but so did sorrow. It meant the world to be remembered, yet the remembering remained hidden, locked away in drawers and whispers. Have you ever been carried quietly in the memories of others even while the world ignored you? Have you ever lived knowing that people believed you but would never speak aloud? If you have, leave a thought in the comments. Sometimes it helps to say it out loud, even in a space like this, even to strangers. I began to see patterns. Veterans who whispered to me often shared a glance when Linda passed by. Their silence was not agreement, it was survival. Beneath the surface, solidarity was forming. It was not loud, it was not open, but it was real. The weight of that realization steadied me. For months I had felt like a ghost. Now I knew I was not alone. The truth lived in the hearts of others, even if it had no stage yet. That knowledge gave me patience. My fight did not need to be rushed. It needed to be careful, steady, rooted in dignity. One afternoon, I sat in the back of a workshop about job training for veterans. Linda stood at the front, her voice polished, her smile flawless. She spoke about opportunity, about resilience. I felt the old sting, but I also noticed something new. As she spoke, several veterans glanced toward me. Subtle, fleeting, but enough to tell me they remembered. Enough to remind me the truth was not dead. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, "The fight will not be won in a single moment. It will be won in steady steps, in gathering voices, in waiting for the right time. If you are listening, maybe you are carrying a truth that cannot be shouted yet. Maybe you are waiting, like I was, for the right time to speak. Tell me if you feel safe, what gives you the strength to hold on through that silence. Share it in the comments. Your strength might be exactly what another person here needs." Winter thawed into spring. The snow melted. The river swelled. The air softened. And with the change in season, I felt something shift inside me. The despair that had once weighed me down began to loosen. It was replaced with resolve. I started to notice things I had missed before. The way Linda's speeches were flawless but cold, rehearsed but hollow. The way veterans nodded politely but did not always linger to thank her. The way conversations shifted when she walked away, as if relief entered the room the moment she left. She had the plaque, she had the spotlight, but I had something she could never truly claim. I had their quiet trust. That was the moment I understood that my worth did not depend on her recognition. My scars were not liabilities. My voice was not weakness. I was not a burden. I was a soldier who had built something out of nothing, who had turned pain into purpose, who had dreamed a home into existence. The realization did not erase the betrayal. It did not remove the ache, but it planted something stronger inside me. Courage. Courage does not always roar. Sometimes it begins as a whisper, the same whisper I heard in the hallways and corners of the center. Courage grows in the silence until the day it finally speaks. And I knew my day would come. That night, as I closed my journal, I made myself a promise. I would not rush. I would not lash out. I would not let bitterness consume me. I would wait. I would gather. And when the moment arrived, I would step forward with the strength of every whisper that had sustained me. Before we close this chapter, I want to ask you something. Have you ever found courage not in shouts or applause, but in the quiet solidarity of those who could not speak aloud? Have you ever felt the strength of knowing others stood with you even in silence? If so, I would love to hear your reflections in the comments. Someone else may need to feel that same strength tonight. As I drifted to sleep, the image of the plaque flashed in my mind again. But this time, I did not crumble. This time, I saw it for what it was. A piece of metal, cold and temporary. The real story lived in the hearts of those who remembered, in the journals where I wrote, in the solidarity quietly forming around me. That was the truth. That was the beginning of justice. And deep inside, I knew the fight had only just begun. There comes a moment when pain can no longer sit quietly inside you. It needs form. It needs order. It needs proof. For me, that moment arrived one cold morning when I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by scattered papers and photographs. My journal had grown thick with memories, but I knew memory alone could not stand against denial. I needed evidence. Something that could not be brushed aside with smooth words or polished speeches. The Navy had trained me in discipline, in documentation, in the art of precision. Reports had to be detailed. Records had to be airtight. Every action accounted for, every detail logged. Those habits were still alive in me, buried beneath the layers of betrayal and grief. And now they rose again. I began by opening an old box in the corner of my closet. Inside were stacks of emails I had printed, correspondence with donors, government officials, contractors. Each message was a thread in the web of work I had poured into the center. I spread them across the table, reading each line, underlining dates, highlighting promises. Next came receipts and invoices. Lumber, paint, furniture. All purchased under my name, all carefully filed away in a folder I had nearly forgotten. Then came letters from local businesses who had donated supplies after I had knocked on their doors and explained the dream. Each one bore my signature at the bottom. As I laid them out, the story took shape before my eyes. Not the story Linda told, but the real one. Piece by piece, paper by paper, I built the skeleton of truth. Have you ever gone back through the evidence of your own life, combing through old letters or photographs to remind yourself of who you are and what you have done? If so, you know how powerful it is to hold those fragments in your hands. If you have ever done this, share what you found in the comments. Sometimes revisiting proof of our own lives gives us strength we forgot we had. For days, I worked like that. Morning until night, I sorted, cataloged, labeled. I filled binders with documents, arranged them in chronological order, wrote notes in the margins. My small kitchen became a command center, every surface covered with files. It was exhausting. It was also healing. For the first time since the plaque unveiling, I felt a sense of control. One afternoon, as I was cataloging a stack of receipts, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Rachel stood there. She was young, barely in her 20s, with a notebook clutched in her hands and determination in her eyes. She asked if she could come in. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She glanced at the binders, the papers spread across the table, and raised her eyebrows. "Looks like you are already telling your story," she said softly. I told her I was not telling a story. I was gathering proof. Proof that I was there, that I mattered, that the center was not the work of one woman alone. Proof that could not be erased. Rachel sat down, opened her notebook, and asked if she could interview me. She had heard whispers around town, fragments of conversations from veterans who hinted that there was more to the story than Linda claimed. Rachel wanted to hear my side. I froze. Part of me longed to say yes, to pour it all out, to let the world finally hear. But another part of me recoiled. I did not want to look like a bitter sister seeking revenge. I did not want to poison the very center I had dreamed of creating. I told Rachel the truth of my hesitation. I said, I do not want to be seen as someone trying to destroy my sister. I just want the truth to be known. Rachel nodded. She did not push. She simply said that sometimes truth itself is the most powerful form of justice. Then she left her card on the table and told me to call her if I ever changed my mind. After she left, I sat for a long time staring at that card. The weight of choice pressed heavy on me. Speaking out meant exposure. It meant risk. It meant opening myself up to ridicule, to dismissal, to the accusation of being unstable or jealous. But silence meant living erased. Silence meant protecting the lie. Have you ever stood at that crossroads, torn between staying silent to keep peace or speaking truth to reclaim yourself? How did you decide which road to take? Share your reflections in the comments. Someone else may be wrestling with the same choice right now. That night, I added Rachel's card to one of the binders, as if filing it with the rest of the evidence. It was not time yet, but maybe soon. Over the next weeks, I doubled my efforts. I scanned every document, saved digital copies, backed them up on drives. I made lists of donors, volunteers, and businesses I had contacted. I gathered affidavits from those willing to sign quietly, promising to stand by their words if needed. My apartment no longer looked like a home. It looked like a war room. And in many ways, it was. Some nights exhaustion crushed me, and I would lay my head on the table surrounded by papers, tears sliding silently down my face. But each time I wanted to give up, I would remember the Marine who said he still had my letter. I would remember the woman who whispered that she had seen me hauling lumber. I would remember the janitor who watched me work until midnight. Their voices became my fuel. The truth was alive. My job was to protect it, record it, and prepare for the day it would finally be heard. In the weeks after Rachel's visit, I worked with a discipline I had not felt since the Navy. Every morning I rose early, brewed strong coffee, and sat at the kitchen table surrounded by files. The apartment felt less like a home and more like a command post. Each binder became a unit, each folder a soldier in formation. I labeled everything with dates, signatures, details that could not be denied. At first, the work drained me, reopening wounds every time I reread an email or letter. But slowly, it began to shift. The papers no longer felt like reminders of betrayal. They became weapons of truth, sharpened edges forged from the fire of my pain. I discovered more than I expected. Old voicemails saved on my phone, notes scribbled in the margins of draft proposals, receipts for supplies purchased out of my own pocket. Every detail mattered. Every scrap built strength. Some evenings I would sit back and let my eyes wander across the table, taking in the piles of proof. I whispered to myself, they cannot erase this. They cannot erase me. The words became a prayer, a mantra, a quiet battle cry. Have you ever built something so carefully, piece by piece, that you felt stronger just by seeing it laid out before you? Have you ever turned fragments of your past into a shield for your future? If you have, share it in the comments. Others might find courage in the way you stitched your truth together. Yet even as my evidence grew, so did my doubts. I wrestled with the question that lingered like a shadow. Was this justice, or was it revenge? If I spoke out, would people see me as a warrior for truth, or as a bitter sister tearing down her family? One night I sat alone with the question. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, shaking the glass as if demanding an answer. I thought back to the oath I had once taken in uniform. To defend, to protect, to serve. That oath was never about personal glory. It was about integrity, and integrity demanded truth. Revenge is fueled by rage. Justice is fueled by dignity. I repeated those words over and over, testing them against my heart. What I wanted was not to see Linda fall. What I wanted was to stand again in the light of my own story. The difference mattered. The difference would guide me. One afternoon, I received a message from the Marine who had kept my grant letter. He invited me to his home. When I arrived, he handed me the letter, carefully preserved in a plastic sleeve. My own handwriting stared back at me. Seeing it again was like touching a younger version of myself, the woman who had believed in possibility before betrayal crushed it. He told me to keep it. He said, "This belongs to you. And when the time comes, it will speak louder than any speech." Tears blurred my vision as I slid the letter into one of my binders. This was more than paper. It was proof that the dream had started with me. Have you ever been handed back a piece of yourself you thought was lost? Have you ever felt the surge of power when someone returned part of your truth to you? If you have, leave a thought in the comments. Your story could remind someone else that nothing is ever truly erased. With every new piece of evidence, my resolve deepened. But so did my caution. I knew timing mattered. Too soon and the town might dismiss me. Too late, and the lie might calcify into history. I needed patience, strategy, clarity. Rachel checked in once more, leaving me a gentle note under my door. She wrote, "When you are ready, I am here. No pressure, just truth." I tucked her note into my journal. I was not ready yet, but the walls inside me were shifting. The silence that once felt protective now felt like a prison. I longed to step beyond it, to breathe in the open air of honesty. Late one night, as I flipped through the binders, I imagined what it might feel like to finally stand and speak, to hold up the evidence, to let the truth echo. The thought both terrified and thrilled me. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, the ground solid beneath my feet, the air vast and unknown before me. I reminded myself that battles are not won all at once. They are won in steps, and I had already taken the first steps. I had recorded the truth. I had gathered the voices. I had built a foundation no one could erase. Before I closed my eyes that night, I asked myself one question. If the choice comes, will you be brave enough to step forward? And now I want to ask you, if you had the chance to speak your truth, knowing it might cost you, would you do it? What gives you the courage to step forward when silence feels safer? Share your reflections in the comments. Someone listening may need your strength more than you know. As I drifted into uneasy sleep, I dreamed of the plaque again. But this time I saw my name etched beside the truth. Not for glory, not for revenge, but for dignity. And in that dream, for the first time in months, I smiled. The day of the grant ceremony dawned crisp and clear, the kind of spring morning that smelled of fresh earth and possibility. I had avoided these gatherings for months, slipping into the shadows, too afraid that my presence would stir whispers or ignite questions I was not ready to answer. But this morning felt different. The binders stacked in my apartment had grown heavy, not only with evidence, but with silence. Silence can protect for a while, but eventually it becomes a cage. I was done living caged. I ironed my uniform jacket, the one I had kept carefully folded in the back of my closet. The metals glinted faintly in the light, tarnished in places but still carrying their weight. As I slid my arms into the sleeves, a familiar steadiness settled over me. The fabric remembered me, and I remembered myself. I tucked a thick folder under my arm, the culmination of months of work. When I arrived at the center, the courtyard was already filling with people. Donors in polished suits, veterans in faded jackets, families holding small flags. A stage had been set up, draped with banners. At its center stood the plaque with Linda's name gleaming as if it had always belonged there. My stomach twisted, but I forced my breath to steady. Linda moved gracefully through the crowd, her smile flawless, her handshake firm. She carried herself like someone who believed the story she had told, like someone who had convinced herself that the truth no longer mattered. When she saw me, her eyes flickered, just for a moment, then her smile returned, brighter, tighter. She nodded at me as if I were only another guest. I took a seat near the back, folder balanced across my lap, hands gripping its edges. My heart pounded so hard I thought the people beside me could hear it. Every instinct screamed to flee, to slip away before anyone noticed. But another voice whispered steady inside me. "You have prepared. You are ready. Stand when the moment comes." The ceremony began with speeches from local officials, their words thick with gratitude and pride. They praised the center as a beacon for veterans, a triumph for the town. Then Linda took the microphone. She stood tall, her voice clear, her smile soft. She spoke of sacrifice, of community, of the long road to creating this home for those who had served. She spoke as though she alone had carried the weight, as though the dream had been born in her heart alone. The words struck me like blows. My breath came shallow. My hands trembled on the folder. I thought of every night I had stayed awake drafting proposals, every blister from hauling lumber, every tear shed when I thought the dream would collapse. I thought of the Marine's letter, the woman with the lumber, the janitor who had seen me work until midnight. I thought of Rachel's quiet words. Silence protects the liar, not the truth. And then I rose. The scrape of my chair echoed louder than I expected. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My knees wobbled, but I steadied them, folder clutched tightly in my hands. Linda's voice faltered as she saw me. For a second her practiced mask slipped, then she forced a smile and continued. But I did not sit back down. I stepped forward, my boots heavy against the pavement. My voice shook as I began, but each word grew stronger. "If this center is truly for veterans," I said, "then let the truth be known. Let everyone see who wrote the first lines that made this place possible." Gasps scattered through the crowd. Some leaned forward, eyes wide. Others whispered behind their hands. I opened the folder and held up the first binder, thick with documents. "These are the grant proposals I wrote," I continued. "These are the receipts for supplies purchased under my name. These are the letters of support sent in response to my calls. This center did not rise from one hand alone. It rose from the work of many, and I was there at the beginning. Rachel was there, camera raised, recording every moment. I saw her eyes shining, steady, urging me on. The crowd shifted. I caught the eyes of veterans scattered throughout. One by one, they began to nod. A man in the second row stood, his back straight despite the cane at his side. "I remember her," he said firmly. "She was the one who asked me to donate." A woman near the aisle rose and added, "I saw her painting the walls until her hands blistered." Another voice called, "She wrote the letter to the National Fund." I saw it myself. The whispers that had lived in the corners of the center for months now rose into the open air. It was no longer silence. It was testimony. Linda's hand trembled on the microphone. She forced a laugh, tried to wave me off, but her smile no longer held. Her eyes darted, her confidence slipping. The polished story was unraveling. Have you ever seen a lie begin to crack? The surface polished and perfect one moment, splitting open the next. Have you ever felt the rush of truth rising after months of silence? If you have, write about it in the comments. Your story may help someone else believe that lies never hold forever. I stood taller then, voice firm. I told them I did not want revenge. I did not want applause. I only wanted the truth recorded so that no veteran would walk through these doors believing lies about how this place was built. I wanted them to know it had been born from someone who wore the same uniform, who carried the same scars, who believed in them. The silence that followed was heavy, not with doubt but with weight. The weight of truth finally spoken. The silence after my words did not feel empty. It felt alive, vibrating through the courtyard like the air just before a storm breaks. I could see the weight of it pressing down on Linda. She tried to recover, clearing her throat, lifting the microphone again. Her smile stretched tight, brittle as glass. "Thank you," she said, her voice too high, too rehearsed. "Thank you, Caroline, for reminding us that this place was a family effort." She gestured vaguely toward the crowd. Of course, we all played a part. Of course, every hand mattered. But her words rang hollow. People had just heard veterans name me, had heard them confirm the truth. No amount of smoothing could erase the tremor in her voice or the fear flickering in her eyes. Rachel moved closer, her camera steady. She was not just filming me anymore. She was capturing the crowd, the veterans rising one after another, their voices weaving together. It was no longer just my testimony. It was ours. A man near the front shouted, "Caroline wrote those letters." Without her, this building would still be rubble. Another added, "I was there the night she stayed past midnight to finish the proposal." She worked harder than anyone. Linda's laugh cracked. She clutched the microphone with white knuckles. "You are mistaken," she insisted. "Memory plays tricks. We all work together." But even as she spoke, more veterans stood. Some raised their hands, others simply nodded. Their eyes locked on me. A quiet murmur swelled, not angry but resolute. I felt my chest loosen, the weight I had carried for months lifting, piece by piece. For so long, the truth had lived only in whispers. Now it was out in the open, undeniable, echoing through the courtyard for everyone to hear. Have you ever lived through a moment when silence finally broke, when the truth you carried alone became a chorus of voices? How did it feel to no longer be the only one speaking? Share it in the comments. You may remind someone else that solidarity often begins with one brave step. I took a breath and spoke again. I am not here to tear my sister down. I am here so that the story carved into this plaque matches the truth. Because this center belongs to veterans, not to falsehood. And veterans deserve honesty. Applause broke out. It was not wild, but steady. A sound born from recognition rather than performance. Strangers clapped. Veterans clapped. Even some donors looked uncertain but joined in. Linda's composure crumbled. She lowered the microphone, her hand trembling. Her eyes darted toward the stage manager, toward the officials, searching for rescue that did not come. The polished mask she had worn for months slipped away. Rachel's camera caught every second. I stepped back, my body trembling but my spine straight. For the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed deeply, freely. I was no longer a ghost. I was no longer erased. I had spoken, and the truth had answered back. The ceremony stumbled forward after that, but the momentum had shifted. The speeches ended quickly. The applause for Linda was scattered, forced. When the event closed, people surrounded me. Some shook my hand. Others embraced me. Veterans pressed notes into my palm, promises to stand beside me if questions arose. Linda avoided me. She slipped away, her head lowered, the mask gone. For the first time, I saw fear in her shoulders, a fear not of me but of the truth she had tried to bury. That night, I walked home beneath a sky alive with stars. My folder was lighter now, not because the papers were gone, but because the burden had lifted. I had carried silence for too long. Now the truth carried me. At my apartment, I placed the binders back on the table. I touched the Marine's letter, the receipts, the photographs. They had been my shield, my weapon, my proof. But tonight, I realized they were more than evidence. They were symbols of resilience. I whispered aloud, not just for myself, but for every veteran who had been silenced. This is not revenge. This is recognition. Have you ever stood in a moment where your pain finally transformed into purpose? Where the scars that once shamed you became the very proof of your strength? If you have, I invite you to share it in the comments. You never know who needs to hear your story tonight. The next morning, Rachel called. Her voice was electric with excitement. The footage was already spreading. People were sharing it online. Veterans from other towns were riding in, saying they knew what it felt like to be erased, to be dismissed, to be silenced. The story was no longer just mine. It had become a beacon. I listened quietly, my heart full. I had not sought a spotlight. I had only sought dignity. But sometimes, speaking truth shines further than you imagine. Sometimes it lights the path for others who are still trapped in silence. As I hung up the phone, I looked at the uniform jacket still draped over the chair. It felt lighter, too, as if wearing it yesterday had not only steadied me but had restored me. I had not worn it for glory. I had worn it for truth. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. No dreams of plaques, no nightmares of silence, only rest, only release. The fight was not over. There would be fallout, questions, perhaps even anger. But the hardest step had been taken. The silence was broken. The truth was alive, and I was no longer afraid. The morning after the grant ceremony, I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing over and over. At first, I thought it was a wrong number. But when I finally reached for it, I saw Rachel's name lighting the screen. Her voice was alive with urgency. The footage had already gone viral. Her article had been published that same night, and by dawn it was everywhere. Headlines called it the veteran who was erased. The comments sections overflowed with outrage. People demanded answers. Veterans from across the state wrote in, telling their own stories of being silenced by families, employers, even by the very institutions meant to protect them. My chest tightened as I scrolled through the comments online. Some wrote that I was brave. Others said they cried when they saw me in uniform holding up the binder of evidence. Many admitted they had no idea what betrayal within families could look like. It struck them as even more painful than betrayal on the battlefield. Have you ever witnessed the power of truth ripple beyond what you expected? Have you ever seen a small act of courage become a spark for others? If so, share your story in the comments. I think the world needs more reminders that even quiet truths can spread like wildfire. The town council could not ignore the uproar. Within days, they scheduled an emergency meeting. The center had been meant to symbolize unity, but now it was drowning in controversy. Local newspapers printed editorials. Some sided with Linda, calling her a visionary leader. Others sided with me, pointing out the evidence and the veterans who had stood up beside me. When the council summoned me, I walked into the chamber wearing the same uniform jacket I had worn at the ceremony. Rachel sat in the back, notebook in hand. Veterans filled the seats, their presence a quiet wall of support. The chairman cleared his throat and spoke carefully. He said the plaque had become a source of division. He said the council wanted to restore trust. Then he announced their decision. The plaque would be replaced with a new one bearing both names, Linda West, Caroline West. A ripple of reaction swept the room. Some applauded, some nodded in relief. To them, it must have felt like compromise, a way to patch the wound without deepening the conflict. But I stood slowly and let my voice carry. "Thank you for your decision," I said, "but I cannot accept my name standing beside hers. I do not want this to be about revenge or shared credit. I only want the truth preserved. This dream was born from a veteran's heart. And if the plaque must carry a name, let it carry mine alone so that every soldier who steps through those doors knows the dream began with one of their own." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Linda stiffened, her face pale. The chairman looked flustered, papers shuffling in his hands. But then the veterans in the back rose as one. Their voices filled the chamber. "She is right," one said. "Let the plaque tell the truth." Another added, "We need honesty more than compromise." Rachel's pen scratched furiously against her notebook. Her eyes shone as she watched the moment unfold. The council had no choice. They adjourned in silence, promising to review. Days later, they announced a new plaque would indeed be commissioned, one bearing a single name, Caroline West. When it was unveiled, I stood before it with tears slipping down my cheeks. The bronze glistened in the sun, each letter etched deep and sure. My hands brushed against the cool surface, tracing the grooves of my own name. For so long I had feared it would vanish. Now it was carved where no one could erase it. Linda did not attend the unveiling. Rumors swirled that she had retreated from public life, that her sponsors had withdrawn, that even her closest allies had begun to doubt her. I did not rejoice in her fall. My heart still ached for the sister I had once loved, the sister who had promised to protect me. But I knew I could not carry both grief and truth forever. I had chosen truth. Have you ever had to choose dignity over family ties? Have you ever walked away from someone you loved because they betrayed you too deeply? If you feel comfortable, share your experience in the comments. Someone else may need to know they are not alone in making that painful choice. The weeks that followed were a blur of interviews and messages. Reporters wanted to hear my voice. Veterans reached out from across the country, sharing their own wounds, their own silences. Many said they had felt invisible until they heard my story. I read each message slowly, letting their words sink in. It was humbling to know my pain had become someone else's hope. I had never wanted to be a symbol, but perhaps that was the gift hidden in betrayal. Perhaps the wound itself had created space for healing others. At night, I returned often to the center. Now, when I walked through the doors, people greeted me with warmth. Veterans shook my hand openly, no longer in whispers. Volunteers stopped to thank me. The atmosphere had changed. It was not just my center anymore. It belonged to all of us. But it finally carried the truth of its beginning. I watched new programs bloom, support groups expand, resources multiply. The dream had survived, and it had grown stronger through fire. One evening, as I stood in the hall lined with flags, an older veteran approached me. He placed a hand on my shoulder and said, "You gave us more than a building. You gave us the reminder that truth matters even when it costs everything." His words stayed with me. They were heavier than any medal I had ever worn. And now I want to ask you, what truth in your life has been worth the cost of speaking? What battle have you fought not with fists or rage, but with dignity and patience? Write it in the comments if you feel called to. Your words may be the encouragement someone else needs to take their own first step. The betrayal by my sister still lingered in quiet moments, like a scar that twinges when the weather changes. I knew some wounds never fully heal, but they do not define us. What defines us is how we carry them, how we choose to turn them into strength instead of chains. When I looked at the plaque with my name alone, I did not see victory over Linda. I saw a promise kept to every veteran who had whispered in the corners, afraid but believing. I saw a beacon for the next soldier who walked through those doors, shoulders heavy with scars, looking for proof that they still mattered. And I knew I had done what I set out to do. I had reclaimed my place in the story. I had refused to vanish. The truth had spoken, and it had been heard. In the end, I did not reclaim a name on a plaque. I reclaimed the right to be seen. For years, I had worn the uniform, carried the weight of service, and then quietly faded into the silence of betrayal. To see my name etched at last was not a victory over my sister. It was a promise kept to every veteran who has ever wondered if their sacrifices were invisible. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not inflicted by strangers. They are cut by those we once trusted most. But even when family fails us, we can still build a new family. A family of brothers and sisters who stand beside us in truth. A family forged not by blood, but by shared scars, by faith, by courage. Justice is not always found in the courtroom. Often it begins in a whisper that says, "I will not be erased." A whisper that grows until it becomes a voice steady enough to carry the truth into the light. So if you are listening tonight and you feel forgotten, know this: you are not alone. You are not invisible. There is strength in speaking your truth, no matter how small the first step may seem. If this story touched you, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Each week we bring stories of honor, courage, and resilience. Stories that will remind you that even in betrayal, hope can rise. Stories that will remind you that no matter how deeply you have been wounded, you can still stand, you can still speak, and you can still be seen. This is not just my story. It belongs to all of us who have ever been told we do not matter. And together, by listening and remembering, we prove that we do.